There's a moment when everyone's laughing, the table buzzing with loose stories, and someone offers a beer. The person smiles, shakes their head and says, "No thanks." Nobody insists. Nobody asks. But deep down, everyone's left with that nagging question. What do they know that we don't? Because it's not about health. It's not about driving. It's about something that happened before. Long before this table, this party, this invitation. An internal fracture they carry without fanfare. And here's the scary detail. People who don't drink aren't running from alcohol. They're running from what it reveals. From the risk of falling apart in public. From losing the mask they hold up every single day. From showing who they really are when the defenses drop. And that changes everything. Because their refusal was never about beer. It was about emotional survival. In this video, you'll understand what nobody talks about, and you might recognize someone, or yourself. There's a specific type of terror that lives in the chest of someone who refuses a drink. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. But it's there, humming quietly beneath every "no thanks" they offer. And it has nothing to do with the liquid itself. It's about what happens when the walls come down. When the rehearsed version of themselves starts to slip. When the filter they've spent years perfecting begins to dissolve in real time. Most people drink to relax. To let go. To feel less alone in a room full of strangers. But for someone who doesn't drink, that's precisely the problem. Because relaxation feels like danger. Letting go feels like losing. And being less guarded? That's not relief. That's exposure. Imagine spending your entire life as the person who holds it together. The one people lean on. The one who never cracks. You've built an identity around being steady, reliable, unshakable. And then someone hands you a beer. What happens if you take it? What happens if 3 drinks in, you say something you can't take back? What if you cry? What if you laugh too loud, reveal too much, or worse? What if people see the version of you that you've worked so hard to bury? This isn't about morality. It's not about being better than anyone else. It's about the suffocating weight of needing to stay in control because the alternative feels like annihilation. And here's the cruel part. Nobody around them understands this. They see someone who's just not into drinking and move on. But inside, that person is holding onto the edge of a cliff with both hands, convinced that one slip will send everything crashing down. The thing about fear is that it disguises itself. It dresses up as preference, as choice, as, "I just don't like the taste," or "I have to wake up early tomorrow." And maybe those things are true on the surface. But underneath, there's a voice whispering, "If I let go, I'll disappear. If I soften, I'll shatter. If I stop performing, people will see that I'm not who I've been pretending to be." And so they stay sober. Not because they're strong, because they're terrified. What makes this even more complicated is that the fear isn't irrational. For many of these people, there's a reason they've built such rigid walls. Maybe they grew up in chaos and swore they'd never lose themselves the way someone close to them did. Maybe they witnessed what happens when people stop thinking clearly, and they decided, consciously or not, that they would never be that vulnerable. Or maybe they just learned early on that the world is safer when you're awake, alert, and 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But here's what nobody tells you. Living like this is exhausting. Staying vigilant every single moment. Monitoring every word, every reaction, every facial expression. It's like being your own security guard, standing watch over a version of yourself that you're convinced is unacceptable. And alcohol? Alcohol is the enemy because it's the one thing that could make you stop watching. The one thing that could make you forget to be afraid. And that, to someone who's built their entire life on control, is the most dangerous thing in the world. The body knows this before the mind does. Your heart rate picks up when someone extends that bottle toward you. Your stomach tightens. There's a flash of something, panic, maybe, or just a deep knowing that this isn't for you. Not because you're special, not because you're different in some noble way, but because your nervous system has already made the calculation. The risk is too high. The cost of losing yourself, even temporarily, outweighs whatever temporary relief or connection you might gain. And the strangest part? Most people who feel this way can't articulate it. If you asked them why they don't drink, they'd fumble for words. They'd give you the easy answers, the ones that don't require vulnerability. But the real answer sits deeper, in a place they've never put language to. It sits in the part of them that learned, somewhere along the way, that being awake is the only way to be safe, that vigilance is survival, that control is the only currency that matters. So they don't drink, and they carry that choice quietly, like a secret they'll never fully explain. Because how do you tell people that you're not avoiding beer? You're avoiding the possibility of becoming someone you don't recognize. How do you admit that your sobriety isn't about health or values, but about the bone-deep belief that if you let your guard down, even for a second, everything you've built will collapse? You don't. You just smile, shake your head, and say, "No thanks," and hope nobody asks why, because the truth is too heavy, too tangled, too raw. And explaining it would require admitting that you're scared. And scared people don't get invited to parties. Living with that level of internal vigilance creates constant mental pressure. Your mind is always on guard, always filtering, always holding things together. Clarity becomes survival, not self-help. And if you want to reduce that internal noise and give your mind a way to reset without lowering your guard, take a look at the Brain Song. It's a science-based method designed to pull the brain out of mental overload and back into real focus in just 12 minutes a day. You'll find the link in the first pinned comment. You don't choose your first memories, they choose you. And for someone who doesn't drink, there's usually a memory that won't let go. It sits in the background of every party, every toast, every casual Friday night. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's just a feeling, a smell, the sound of a door slamming at 2 in the morning, a voice that got louder as the night went on, a version of someone they loved turning into someone they didn't recognize. Children are incredible observers. They don't have the language to process what they're seeing, but they absorb everything. And when a child watches an adult drink, they're not just watching someone have a good time. They're watching a transformation. They're seeing how a person changes, how their eyes glaze over, how their words slur, how the warmth disappears, and something else takes its place. Something unpredictable. And unpredictability, to a child, is danger. So they make a decision. Not consciously, not in words. But somewhere deep in their nervous system, a rule gets written. I will never do that. I will never become that. I will never let myself lose control the way they did. And that rule doesn't go away when they grow up. It becomes part of their wiring, part of how they move through the world, part of why they say no when everyone else says yes. But here's the strange part. Even when the childhood was relatively safe, even when there wasn't trauma in the traditional sense, there's still often a ghost in the room. Maybe it wasn't their parent. Maybe it was an uncle at a family gathering who got too loud, too handsy, too embarrassing. Maybe it was a neighbor, a friend's dad, someone they saw unravel in front of them, and even though it wasn't happening to them directly, they felt the weight of it. They felt the shame, the tension, the way everyone pretended nothing was wrong the next day. And that teaches a child that alcohol doesn't just change people. It creates a second reality where everyone agrees to pretend the first reality didn't happen. And if you're a kid who values truth, who needs things to make sense, who can't stand the cognitive dissonance of pretending everything's fine when it clearly isn't, well, you're going to walk away from that substance entirely. Because it's not just about what it does to you, it's about what it does to the room. Some people carry their childhood like a backpack, others carry it like a scar. But for those who don't drink, childhood is often still in the room with them, sitting quietly in the corner, reminding them why they made the choice they did. And the hardest part? They can't just get over it, because the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. The nervous system doesn't care that they're adults now, that they're safe, that they're in control. It remembers the feeling of being small and powerless while someone else lost themselves. And it will do anything, to make sure that never happens again. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. A kind of silent vow that gets made in childhood and never spoken aloud. I will be different. I will be better. I will never make someone feel the way I felt. And that vow becomes a mission, a purpose. a way of moving through the world that feels both righteous and suffocating. Because it's not just about avoiding alcohol. It's about avoiding becoming the thing they feared most. The unpredictable adult. The one who causes harm without meaning to. The one who has to apologize the next morning for things they don't remember doing. And so, they build their life around this vow. They become the responsible one. The sober one. The one who remembers. The one who drives everyone home. The one who holds hair back and hands out water and makes sure nobody does anything too stupid. And on the surface that looks like kindness, like generosity. But underneath it's armor, it's protection. It's a way of making sure they never, ever become the person who needed someone to take care of them. When you understand this, the refusal of a drink stops being about preference. It becomes a testament to survival, a marker of a choice made long ago, in a moment when they were too young to understand what they were choosing, but old enough to know they never wanted to feel that way again. And that choice follows them into adulthood, into every social gathering, into every moment when someone offers them something that everyone else seems to want. Because they don't want it. They can't want it. Wanting it would mean betraying the child who made that vow. And they're not ready to do that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. So when they say no to a drink, they're not rejecting you. They're protecting the child who's still inside them, watching, waiting, making sure the door doesn't slam again. Now we're getting into something most people never talk about. The body keeps score. Not metaphorically, literally. Your muscles, your gut, your heart rate, they all hold information about what's safe and what isn't. And for someone who doesn't drink, their body has often decided long before their brain caught up that alcohol is a threat. This isn't about health trends or fitness goals. This is deeper, primal. When you grow up in a world where you had to stay alert, where you learned that survival meant paying attention to shifts in tone, in energy, in mood, your body becomes a radar. It scans, it detects, it warns you. And alcohol? Alcohol shuts that radar off. It dulls the senses. It makes you slower to react. And for someone whose body has spent years in hypervigilance mode, that's not relaxation. That's vulnerability. That's exposure. That's death. So they build a fortress, not with walls, but with rules. No drinking, no drugs, nothing that compromises clarity. And over time, this fortress becomes their identity. It becomes the thing that separates them from everyone else. The thing that makes them feel safe. And the irony, the fortress that protects them also isolates them. Because while everyone else is loosening up, connecting, letting their guard down, they're standing watch, still scanning, still alert, still alone. But there's something else happening here that's even more subtle. The body doesn't just protect against external threats. It also protects against internal ones. And for many people who don't drink, there's a part of themselves they're afraid to meet. A part that's angry, or sad, or wild, or broken. A part that they've kept locked away for so long that the idea of letting it out, even for a moment, feels catastrophic. Alcohol is a key. It opens doors that were meant to stay shut. And when you've spent your whole life keeping certain feelings, certain memories, certain truths at bay, the last thing you want is a substance that's going to bring them all rushing to the surface. So you don't drink. Not because you're strong, because you're scared of what you'll find if you do. The body becomes the boundary, the line you don't cross, and everyone else sees discipline. But you? You know it's fear dressed up as self-control. There's also a physical component that people overlook. When you've trained your body to operate at peak awareness for long enough, anything that disrupts that feels wrong. Not morally wrong, physically wrong. Your body rejects it. The taste is too bitter. The smell is too sharp. The warmth in your throat feels invasive. It's not about willpower. It's about the fact that your system has been calibrated to reject anything that compromises your edge. And once that calibration is set, it's almost impossible to override. This is why people who don't drink often can't relate to the idea that alcohol helps you relax. Because for them, it doesn't. It creates tension. It makes them hyper-aware of what they're losing with every sip. Clarity. Sharpness. The ability to leave at a moment's notice if things go south. The ability to drive, to think, to react, to protect themselves. All of that slips away with alcohol, and their body knows it, feels it, resists it. And here's the part that's almost impossible to explain to someone who drinks casually. The loss of control isn't gradual for them. It's immediate. One drink doesn't feel like loosening up. It feels like the first crack in a dam. And they know that if they let that crack widen, everything they've worked so hard to contain is going to come flooding out. So they stop before they start. They don't test the waters. They don't take chances, because the risk isn't worth the reward. What this creates is a body that's both a sanctuary and a prison. A sanctuary because it's the one thing they can control. A prison because it demands constant vigilance, constant discipline, constant sacrifice. And the exhausting part is that nobody sees this. They see someone who doesn't drink and they think it's easy. They think it's a simple choice, but it's not. It's a daily negotiation with a body that's been trained to protect itself at all costs. And that protection comes with a price. The price of never fully letting go, never fully relaxing, never fully trusting that the world is safe enough to stop watching. Here's the part nobody warns you about. When you don't drink, you're not just opting out of alcohol. You're opting out of a shared experience, a ritual, a language that everyone else speaks fluently. And that creates a gap, a distance, a kind of loneliness that's hard to name because it's not about being physically alone. It's about being present but separate, in the room but not really in it. Watch what happens at a party. The first round of drinks comes out. People start loosening up. Jokes land easier. Conversations flow faster. Walls come down. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the person who's sober starts to feel it. The shift. The moment when everyone else enters a space they can't access. And suddenly they're on the outside looking in. Not because anyone pushed them out, but because sobriety creates a distance that's invisible but undeniable. And the cruel part? They chose this. They knew what they were signing up for. They knew that saying no would mean standing apart. But knowing doesn't make it easier, because humans are wired for connection. We're built to bond, to belong, to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And when everyone around you is connecting in a way you can't, or won't, participate in, the loneliness cuts deeper. Because it's not inflicted. It's chosen. And chosen loneliness always hurts more. There's also a strange resentment that builds over time. Not towards the people drinking. Towards themselves. For being the way they are. For not being able to just relax like everyone else. For not being able to take one drink and be fine. For needing to be so vigilant, so controlled, so separate. And that resentment festers because there's nowhere to put it. You can't blame anyone else. You can't even blame the alcohol. You can only sit with the uncomfortable truth that you're different, and that difference costs you something every single time you're in a social setting. But here's what makes it even more complicated. Sometimes the loneliness isn't just about being sober in a room full of drunk people. It's about the fact that sobriety forces you to see things clearly. You notice when conversations turn shallow, when people start repeating themselves, when the laughter gets a little too loud, a little too forced. You see the performance, the masks, the way people use alcohol to become a version of themselves they think is more likable. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that awareness? That makes you feel even more alone. Because now, you're not just different. You're awake in a room full of people who are choosing to be asleep. And so, they stay on the edge. Present but distant. Participating, but not fully. Smiling, but feeling the weight of the gap. And no one else notices. Because everyone's too busy having a good time. There's also a timing issue that amplifies everything. Early in the night, when everyone's still relatively sober, the person who doesn't drink fits in just fine. They laugh at the same jokes. They contribute to conversations. They feel connected. But as the night progresses, as people drink more, as inhibitions lower and energy shifts, they start to feel like they're watching a play. Everyone else is performing. Acting out a version of connection that feels increasingly hollow the more they observe it. And they can't join in because they're not playing the same game. They're playing a different one. One where authenticity matters more than fun. Where truth matters more than fitting in. And that game you play alone. What's particularly painful is the realization that sometimes people prefer the drunk version of each other. They prefer the looseness, the lack of filter, the exaggerated emotions. And when you're the sober one, you start to wonder, do people actually like me? Or do they just tolerate me because I'm useful? Because I drive? Because I remember? Because I clean up the mess? And that question, that doubt, eats away at your sense of belonging until you're not sure if you have a place in these spaces at all. There's also the issue of memory. The sober person remembers everything. Every awkward moment, every overshare, every argument that got too heated. And the next day, when everyone else has forgotten or conveniently chosen to move on, they're still carrying it, still processing it, still trying to make sense of why people act one way when they're drunk and another way when they're sober. And that dissonance creates a kind of loneliness that's hard to articulate, because you're the only one holding the full story, the only one who knows what actually happened, and everyone else? They're living in a version of the night that's been edited by forgetfulness, and you're stuck with the unedited version, alone. And maybe that's the deepest cut. Not that they're lonely because they don't drink, but that they're lonely because they remember, because they see, because they're awake. And being awake in a world that values forgetting, that's the loneliest place of all. Let's be honest. There's always judgment. It's subtle, it's unspoken, but it's there. When someone doesn't drink, people notice. And they wonder. They fill in the blanks with their own stories. Maybe they're boring. Maybe they think they're better than us. Maybe they had a problem. The assumptions fly quietly under the surface of polite conversation, but they land. And the person who doesn't drink feels them. Every single one. And here's the thing. Sometimes those assumptions are right. Sometimes the person who doesn't drink does feel a little bit superior. Not consciously. Not maliciously. But there's a part of them that looks around the room and thinks, I'm clearer than all of you. I'm more present. I'm more in control. And that thought, even if they never say it out loud, creates a barrier. Because judgment flows both ways. If they're judging others for drinking, then others are going to sense it, and they're going to pull back. And that distance becomes mutual. But the reverse is also true. The person who doesn't drink is being judged too. Every time they decline, they're disrupting the social flow. They're making people feel self-conscious. Because when everyone else is drinking and one person isn't, it forces everyone to confront their own choices. Am I drinking too much? Do I look ridiculous? Is this person silently criticizing me? And those questions create discomfort. And discomfort creates distance. And distance creates judgment. So now you've got two groups. The drinkers, who feel judged for drinking, and the non-drinker, who feels judged for not drinking. And both sides are right. Because the judgment is real. It's not imagined. It's not paranoia. It's the natural byproduct of two incompatible experiences existing in the same space. And nobody knows how to bridge that gap because acknowledging it would require a level of vulnerability that most people aren't willing to access, especially not after 3 beers. What makes this particularly painful is that the judgment isn't always external. The harshest critic is often internal. The person who doesn't drink spends an enormous amount of energy wondering if they're doing the right thing, wondering if they're missing out, wondering if their reasons are valid or if they're just overthinking everything. And that internal judgment is exhausting, because there's no winning. If they drink, they betray themselves. If they don't drink, they feel like an outsider, and either way, they lose. And so they navigate this invisible minefield, trying to be normal, trying to fit in, trying not to make anyone uncomfortable, while simultaneously feeling the weight of everyone's unspoken questions pressing down on them. And the loneliest part? They can't talk about it. Because the moment they try to explain, they sound defensive, or preachy, or like they're making a big deal out of nothing. So they stay quiet, and the judgment continues. From both sides. Invisible. Unspoken. But always there. There's also a dynamic that happens over time where the person who doesn't drink starts to internalize the judgment. They start to see themselves through other people's eyes. Maybe I am boring. Maybe I am too uptight. Maybe I should just have one drink and stop being so difficult. And that internalized judgment is dangerous because it chips away at the very foundation of their choice. It makes them question whether their boundaries are valid, whether their reasons are good enough, whether they have the right to say no in a world that constantly says yes. And this is where things get really complicated. Because the person who doesn't drink often has very good reasons for their choice. Reasons rooted in survival, in protection, in self-knowledge. But those reasons don't always translate well in social settings. They're too heavy, too personal, too raw. So they get reduced to simple explanations that don't capture the full truth. And those simple explanations invite judgment, because they sound like excuses, like someone who just can't handle what everyone else can handle. And that perception, that they're weak or uptight or judgmental, becomes the story everyone tells, even though it's not true. Even though the real story is so much deeper. What's particularly cruel is that the judgment often comes from a place of insecurity. People who drink don't want to examine their own relationship with alcohol. They don't want to ask themselves why they needed to have fun, why they needed to connect, why they needed to feel comfortable in their own skin. So when someone shows up and doesn't need it, it's threatening. It holds up a mirror, and instead of looking at that mirror, people deflect. They judge. They create distance. They tell themselves stories about why the other person is wrong, so they don't have to confront what might be true about themselves. And the person who doesn't drink, they carry all of that. The external judgment, the internal judgment, the weight of being the mirror nobody wants to look at. And they do it quietly. Because what else can they do? They can't force people to understand. They can't make people see. All they can do is stand firm in their choice and hope that someday the judgment will hurt less. That someday they'll care less about what other people think. That someday they'll find people who don't need them to drink to accept them. But until then, they navigate, they endure, and they hope the gap closes just enough to let them breathe. But here's where the story shifts. Because after all the fear, all the loneliness, all the judgment, there's something else. Something quieter. Something that only reveals itself after years of staying sober in a world that drinks. And it's this. Clarity is its own kind of freedom. Not the freedom everyone talks about. Not the I can do whatever I want kind. But the freedom that comes from knowing yourself completely. From never waking up wondering what you said. From never having to apologize for a version of yourself you don't remember being. From never losing hours of your life to a blur you can't piece back together. That kind of freedom is rare, and it's powerful. And most people will never experience it because they're too busy chasing the other kind. When you don't drink, you're forced to sit with yourself. Fully. There's no escape hatch. No way to numb the discomfort, dull the anxiety, or blur the edges of a bad day. You feel everything. And that's terrifying at first. But over time, something shifts. You start to realize that you're capable of handling your own emotions without a crutch. You start to trust yourself. And that trust? That's the foundation of real freedom. There's also a strange power in being the person who remembers. In being the one who stays awake while everyone else fades. You see patterns. You notice things. You become the keeper of truth in a room full of people who are choosing to forget. And while that can feel lonely, it also makes you reliable, trustworthy. The person people call when things fall apart. Because they know you'll be there. Steady. Unchanged. Unshaken. But the deepest freedom isn't about what others see. It's about what you know. You know that you're not running anymore. You're not hiding behind a substance to feel comfortable in your own skin. You're here. Fully here. And that presence, that rawness, that willingness to exist without a buffer. That's the kind of strength most people spend their whole lives avoiding. And maybe that's the real difference. Not that they don't drink, but that they've chosen to face themselves. Every day. Without distraction. Without escape. And that choice, as painful as it is, has given them something most people never find. Themselves. There's also something that happens when you stop needing external things to feel okay. When you stop relying on substances, on validation, on anything outside yourself to make you feel whole. You start to realize that everything you need has always been inside you. That the strength, the clarity, the peace you've been searching for, it's not out there. It's in here. And accessing it doesn't require a drink. It requires the courage to sit still, to be quiet, to listen to the parts of yourself you've been drowning out for years. And that's where the real transformation happens. Not in the refusal itself, but in what the refusal makes possible. Because when you stop numbing, you start feeling. And when you start feeling, you start healing. And when you start healing, you start becoming the person you were always meant to be. The person who doesn't need anything outside themselves to feel complete. The person who's comfortable in their own skin. The person who can walk into any room and know deeply that they belong. Not because everyone accepts them, but because they accept themselves. This is the freedom nobody sees. The freedom that doesn't come with applause or recognition. The freedom that's quiet, internal, unshakable. It's the freedom of knowing that no matter what happens, no matter who leaves, no matter how hard life gets, you'll be okay. Because you've proven to yourself over and over again that you can handle it. That you can sit with discomfort. That you can face your fears. That you can exist in a world that's constantly offering you an escape and still choose to stay present. And here's the beautiful part. Once you find that freedom, once you taste what it feels like to be fully yourself without apology or explanation, you stop caring what other people think. You stop needing their approval. You stop measuring your worth by how well you fit in, because you've found something more valuable than belonging. You've found yourself. And once you have that, nothing else matters quite as much. So when they say no to a drink, they're not saying no to fun. They're not saying no to connection. They're saying yes to something deeper, something truer, something that took years to build and will take a lifetime to protect. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most powerful choice anyone can make. Not to drink, but to be free.